Today, I will talk about ACTIVIDAN as a product that is essential for any person. And why is that? ACTIVIDAN contains fucoidan from brown seaweed, with a high content of L-fucose and sulfate groups. When we talk about fucoidan, it is often said that it contains polysaccharides. I can say right away, polysaccharides include glycogen, chitin, starch, and other substances. The components of ACTIVIDAN, which are very necessary for our body in modern conditions, are not found in starch, glycogen, or other substances that could effectively compete and claim that they contain polysaccharides. What is contained in our ACTIVIDAN is primarily monosaccharides or oligosaccharides. We are talking about sulfated forms, which are obtained through the processing of what we get from brown seaweed using sulfates, which are essentially phosphorus esters of carbohydrates. That is, we process it with phosphoric acid, sulfuric acid, and naturally obtain various monomers or oligomers that contain substances vital for our body. Our fucoidan, branded by the company Vimgrace as ACTIVIDAN, plays a huge role in the prevention and maintenance of health. For what purpose are monosaccharides and oligosaccharides used in our body, and what role do they play? Since we are talking about fucoidan, although it is classified as a polysaccharide because its formula forms longer chains, the primary polysaccharide we are familiar with is starch. Besides starch, there is cellulose or fiber, but fiber is not found in fucoidan. There is glycogen, as I mentioned, and chitin. But glycogen is the main reserve polysaccharide of all higher animals and humans. It is built from alpha-D-glucose residues and is produced and stored primarily in the liver from our monosaccharides or oligosaccharides. Although glycogen is found in muscles, the brain, and many other cells of our human body. If we talk about the functions of carbohydrates, monosaccharides are carbohydrates that do not hydrolyze into simpler carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates are primarily glucose. However, our monosaccharides, in their sulfated form, include glucose, galactose, and so on. In addition, there are more complex forms in the form of fucoses, galactoses, mannoses, xyloses, uronic acids, and so on. For what purpose do we use the structures we have mentioned, especially monosaccharides? Most often, these are uronic acid-containing organic substances, which, being related to monosaccharides, differ by the presence of carboxyl groups, that is, COOH, if you remember chemistry. And they are part of glucopolysaccharides. Glucuronic acid contains fucose or 6-deoxygalactose, a monosaccharide, also related to hexoses, and is part of oligosaccharides that, first and foremost, determine blood groups and the antigenic specificity of tissues in the body. When we talk about the composition of our fucoidan and its medicinal properties, we already imply that the composition of our fucoidan contains a large number of substances necessary for our body that participate in many biochemical reactions in the human body. First of all, we understand that the function of monosaccharides is primarily an energy function. They participate in the formation of triphosphate, this is ADP, which actually supports all the life processes of each cell in the human body. In addition, our monosaccharides perform a plastic function. They participate in the formation of glyco-, oligo-, and polysaccharides. I told you that from both mono and oligosaccharides, the body forms what becomes the reserve of the human body, which is our glycogen. And glycogen is precisely classified as a polysaccharide. Moreover, our monosaccharides participate in the formation of amino acids. That is, any deficiency in our diet, especially in terms of monosaccharides that are easily absorbed and reconstructed due to their plastic function, leads to disturbances in amino acids, nitrogen-containing amino acids. And our genetic material, amino acids, is involved in the formation of lipids and nucleotides, from which our DNA and RNA are built. These are very complex biochemical processes. We have repeatedly talked about our fucoidan as a powerful antioxidant. Here it acts as a detoxifier. That very glycogen, stored in the liver, breaks down into monosaccharides under any toxic stress on our body. And these monosaccharides, as glucose derivatives, participate in neutralizing toxic metabolites, xenobiotics, and the same medications. As we always say, it protects our human body. We understand that the same monosaccharides are fragments of such formations as cerebrosides in our body, which are essentially glycoproteins in the human body. And we understand that disaccharides in the body are always hydrolyzed into two monosaccharides. In humans, only one disaccharide is formed, lactose. And you remember, lactose is synthesized during lactation in the mammary gland and is found in milk. It is the only source of glucose and galactose for newborns. If the mother produces little milk, the child receives not only insufficient glucose, but also galactose, which is, by itself, very important for the human body. What I told you are actual reconstructions, inactivations, and so on. And the oligosaccharides I told you about, that is, fucoidan in the general component, is a whole set of mono and oligosaccharides. These are fragments of glycoproteins. That is, they are enzymes, transport proteins, receptor proteins, hormones, various glycoproteins, and they form a glycocalyx on the surface of every cell, protecting the cell from the introduction of foreign agents and from the destruction of membrane components, both of the membrane itself and its derivatives. And here we understand that polysaccharides and oligosaccharides are necessary for our body. Polysaccharides are carbohydrates that hydrolyze into 10 or more monosaccharides. That is, when we are told, eat more fiber, otherwise the intestines will not function. But I repeat, in the composition of our ACTIVIDAN, there is no starch, glycogen, cellulose, or chitin. The fucoidan composition contains only mono and oligosaccharides. If we talk about fucoidan as a natural dietary component, whose structure is close to those sugars formed in the human body from polysaccharides, we understand that with any deficiency in food, we will inevitably face various diseases. Since human food consists primarily of polysaccharides, such as starch and cellulose, while glycogen is contained in animals to a lesser extent, and the source of sucrose for us is always plants, we consume sugar from sugar beets and sugar cane. Lactose comes from the milk of mammals, cow's milk, goat's milk. And lactose, of course, is found in human milk. In human milk, up to 8% is lactose, while in cow's milk, it's only 5%. When we talk about glucose, fructose, and maltose, we consume honey, juices that contain not so much glucose and fructose, but maltose is found in beer, as malt contains maltose. We understand that carbohydrates are a source of monosaccharides, primarily glucose. It is important to remember that polysaccharides contained in food, especially cellulose, pectin substances, and dextrins, are not digested in the human gastrointestinal tract. They act as sorbents. If, with the help of enzymes, polysaccharides are formed in our gastrointestinal tract, we say that the gastrointestinal tract functions as a sorbent, removing cholesterol, bile acids, toxins, and so on. We understand that our fucoidan composition plays a similar role. That's why we achieve the results we see. Everyone needs to remember that carbohydrates are an essential component of our diet. Food is the #1 cause of many diseases. It accounts for 85% of all diseases that humanity suffers from. If we consider the proper composition of nutrition, the proportions in which glucose should enter our body, carbohydrates, as an essential component of our diet, should make up 75% of the mass of the food ration, as over 50% of the necessary calories come from carbohydrates. The daily need for an adult is 400 grams per day of sugar or fructose, which we consume. We also need to consume 10 to 15 grams of polysaccharides daily, such as cellulose, pectin, etc. These are mainly plant or animal-based sources, which help to remove toxins and properly form stool masses. If we analyze all the dietary standards, an adult is recommended to consume more complex polysaccharides and fewer monosaccharides. That is, if you consume 400 grams of sugar a day, diabetes will surely come even to those not at risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Therefore, any dietitian or doctor recommends complex polysaccharides in the form of fiber. Eat more fruits and vegetables, which contain these polysaccharides. And it is from these polysaccharides that we get L-fucose, galactose, mannose, xylose, uronic acid, and sulfated glucose and 6-deoxygalactose. When we talk about the composition of our food, since what enters the body in the form of mono or oligosaccharides, once again, stabilizes cell membranes. It regulates the matrix derivatives. This includes our collagen, P-selectins, and various L-selectins, other structures that we talk about, up to substances that regulate and limit inflammatory processes. Here, naturally, we create a balance for our body, counteracting any factors that can lead to changes not only in cell membranes but also in intracellular organelles. These, once again, are composed of galactose, mannose, xylose, uronic acid, fucose, glucose, and 6-deoxygalactose, forming their membranes, as there are both membrane and non-membrane organelles inside cells. Supporting health through sulfated structures, which are included in our fucoidan, helps to maintain normal cell restructuring and prevents changes to our DNA. The two spirals of DNA are linked primarily by sulfate groups. Our body contains a lot of biochemical structures. If we look at all the biochemical reactions, enzymes, hormones, and so on, they contain a lot of sulfates. When there is a lack of these sulfates, bonds are disrupted, interactions within DNA and RNA are disturbed. As I mentioned, there are numerous studies confirming that our fucoidan in the form of actividan also monitors genetic material, preventing any damage to it so that the cell functions properly. After all, the same structure of DNA in different cells. No, not just egg cells and sperm cells. Every cell has a nucleus that contains DNA. RNA is primarily the intracellular matrix. An individual ribosome is formed, and ribosomes are attached to the membranes of our networks, which we call the endoplasmic reticulum. If a cell is supposed to produce milk, it must produce milk. If any structure of the intracellular matrix is disrupted, or there is a breakdown in RNA or DNA structures, you get a small amount of milk that is not calorically sufficient and lacks essential groups. Therefore, we understand that this is a molecular cellular restructuring of our human body. Additionally, connections between cells are strengthened, and control over the work of every cell in our body is reinforced. Therefore, today, based on the numerous studies conducted on the effects of fucoidan on the human body, it is emphasized that its primary functional responsibilities in the human body are the cleansing of our body at the cellular level. We consist of 80 billion different cells, our body is built from them, and all cells are interconnected, surrounded by the intercellular matrix. Even our bone tissue is an intercellular matrix in the form of collagen fibers, and collagen is, again, practically the same structures that are part of fucoidan. In the absence of sufficient amounts, abnormal collagen formation occurs, or less of it is produced. We begin to age, we wrinkle, we can no longer connect structures, the bone cartilage framework changes, and diseases begin. Cells are subjected to constant stress. Therefore, cleaning the body at the cellular level with actividan is indeed the primary function for the body. And if you overdose on anything, any toxic substances, remember what I told you? There are exotoxins, and there are endotoxins produced in the human body. If a cell is damaged and does not have enough strength to resist these destructive factors, the process of self-destruction of this cell begins. Once again, this is linked to our genes, which are found in the nucleus. If there are any changes that lead to fewer receptors being produced, which contribute to triggering this process of apoptosis, the cell simply destroys its membrane. Our actividan is so versatile that it controls these processes. If a cell cannot independently initiate the process of apoptosis, actividan activates these processes on the intact receptors inside and outside the cell or independently attracts our immune system cells to the area of the dying cell. And apoptosis is important for eliminating improperly differentiating cells. It prevents the formation of abnormal cells in the human body, which are linked to congenital diseases, acquired diseases, and autoimmune diseases, primarily. Here we understand that even healthy people need to consume our actividan. And as I always say, a dead cell must be replaced. However, as we age, the number of cells capable of maintaining the status quo of the cell composition decreases. Or the destruction zone is extensive. Whether it is a burn, some trauma, or non-healing wounds. Why? Because the area of damage is extensive, and there are no functional stem cells to quickly fill the defect in the tissue or cellular composition. Our ACTIVIDAN also improves both the quantity and quality of our stem cells, promoting the healing and regeneration of damaged areas of our human body. We said at the beginning that our mono and oligosaccharides have a very important function. Indeed, the antiviral, antifungal, and antibacterial properties of our ACTIVIDAN are linked to the fact that mono and oligosaccharides are able to bind viruses, fungi, and prevent their reproduction, forming a film, and essentially activating the destruction processes through our cellular and humoral immunity. In fact, the structure of our ACTIVIDAN is the basis for the effects ACTIVIDAN has on our body. As an immunomodulator, as I mentioned, its role is primarily in the processes of apoptosis, to control the proper selection of leukocytes. These are largely responsible for autoimmune reactions in the human body when they begin to destroy the host's own cells, forming immune complexes, which bind together and destroy the body. All these processes of forming proper, normal interactions among our immune-competent cells need to be enhanced. Because in the case of excess formation, leukemia, it is uncontrolled proliferation of leukocyte cells, with no apoptosis, no rejection process. No one stops them, but our ACTIVIDAN is capable of doing that. In fact, the first studies on fucoidan focused on blood cancer. But subsequent research confirmed not only its effectiveness in controlling and maintaining the quality of our immune system's cellular composition, but also fucoidan's regulation of the processes of humoral immunity. Each tissue has its specific cells. Either in the intercellular matrix or in epithelial layers, they produce the humoral factor of immunity, which primarily consists of our immunoglobulins. Their action either limits the start of inflammation or enhances it, involving healthy cells, irritating healthy cells. ACTIVIDAN can limit inflammatory processes because, at the early stage of inflammation, due to interactions with P-selectin, it enhances the migration of leukocytes to the sites of inflammation. At the same time, other components of humoral immunity, such as L-selectins, which are involved in leukocyte aggregation during inflammation, are also limited, as are integrins, which belong to the so-called immunoglobulin family. And we understand that these glycoproteins, in interaction with carbohydrate ligands that are part of our ACTIVIDAN, effectively limit the sites of inflammation, speed up the healing process, and bring about a very rapid and positive effect on the body's recovery. When we talk about tumor processes occurring in the human body, I mentioned that oncology has been studied for a long time. The entire global medical community is studying the cellular composition of tumors. It's not just about classification, but also understanding why. In 1986, Professor Hines discovered a reduction in fibronectin synthesis on the cell membrane. This is a transmembrane complex, a multimolecular structure, characteristic only of malignant transformations. And tumor cells stop producing fibronectin. They start synthesizing other substances that prevent the correct division of cells and the proper differentiation of cells. Why an altered cell stops producing fibronectin is still not known. Every cell is bathed in blood. When ACTIVIDAN enters the cell through the bloodstream, every cell receives its portion of oxygen. Each cell receives its portion of the substances that, being absorbed into the blood, are delivered to every cell. When an altered cell consumes our ACTIVIDAN, the processes of restoring fibronectin production are initiated. The transformation of not yet fully altered cells into a normal cell composition begins. Alternatively, apoptosis is artificially triggered for such cells, and tumors begin to break down. All the research that has been conducted, which we have already discussed, confirms that the molecular structure and unique composition of fucoidan allow virtually all the substances, which are primarily part of our ACTIVIDAN, to cause such changes in the human body at the cellular level. But as I always tell you, any ailments we discuss, any conditions of our body, are primarily related to our circulatory system. If there is no blood in the body, the heart doesn't work, the body cannot live, and the brain dies first. The condition of our blood vessels, the composition of blood properties, its viscosity, and so on are the primary tasks that our Actividan begins to address. Improving the condition of blood vessels, supporting the logical properties of blood, Actividan promotes apoptosis, cleansing, regeneration, and other properties that we have talked about. But first and foremost, it's about the state of the blood vessels. The fact is that on the walls of any blood vessel, on the outer membrane, called the adventitia of the vessels, there is a large number of so-called mast cells. They are present in the connective tissue of many organs and produce heparin. Heparin, in its structure, is very similar to 6-deoxygalactose. They have almost the same molecular structure. If, for some reason, our body begins to produce insufficient amounts of endogenous heparin locally or in general, thrombosis, damage to the vessel wall, changes in the lining of the vessels, and thrombus formation within the vessel occur. Because again, the interaction between the cellular composition of the formed elements of the blood and the clotting and anti-clotting systems is disrupted. Most of the components of the anti-clotting system, in particular, also have a glycoprotein base. So, we end up in a vicious cycle that we cannot stop. If we lack the necessary components in our diet, the body wears out, breaks down, disease takes over, and we age, wither, become disabled, and eventually die. So you see how important the cellular composition of our body is and the impact of mono and oligosaccharides, which are part of our Actividan, on the restoration of all functions of our body. It's important to support the immune system at the proper level. Support all the tissues of the supporting apparatus. This includes cartilage, bone tissue, connective tissue, and even the skin, which interferes with joint function when there is an inflammatory process. We understand that the cleansing of the body is through the liver and kidneys, which consist of specific cells, like any tissues. Improving the functions of these vital organs is also a fantastic result since there is no overdose of fucoidan. Children have a glycogen reserve in their liver. Although they are born with a relatively good reserve of glycogen, the liver occupies more volume in a child than any other abdominal content. After 2 months, this glycogen reserve is almost depleted. There is no reserve of fat-soluble vitamins. You perfectly understand that the processes of absorption, medication, and the components that participate in supporting the oxygen saturation of cells occur due to the normal formation of hemoglobin. The entire function of the circulatory system is timely and rapid delivery of components that prevent blood clotting, promote cleansing, and support the normal function of blood circulation and its movement. This is the work of the gastrointestinal tract, where polysaccharides, oligosaccharides, and monosaccharides break down, bind, and enter the bloodstream, and they support the functions of our body, ensuring timely restructuring, so we do not age. It's the binding due to the rapid breakdown and dissociation of those oligosaccharides into monosaccharides, and freeing up bonds to bind free radicals. Radiation exposure involves a large number of free radicals in our body. This is also the suppression of tumor cell activity, which has lost the ability to self-repair. This is also the restoration of the outer covering, which is essential for our women. Look at the women who have been consuming our Actividan for over a year, how much younger they look compared to their peers. You could never guess their age, based on their actual passport age. So, we understand that thanks to the unique composition of our Actividan, we can recommend our Actividan to both healthy people and patients who have health problems. It is what restores the body. You understand that the doses are very different. It can be from 1 sachet to 6, or even 9 sachets a day, especially for cancer. We understand that here we are talking about dosage. For a healthy person, 5 mg per kilogram of body weight. For a sick person, if there are chronic diseases, but in remission, a maintenance dose of 10 mg per kilogram of body weight when nothing bothers you. Understand that it's better to divide the dosage into smaller portions rather than taking it all at once. Because glucose is absorbed quickly, we always need to replenish the body. Why? We divide the dosage into several intakes, especially in diseases. In the acute phase, you can take up to 6 to 9 sachets every 15 minutes. If your intestines get upset, well, a little diarrhea, no big deal. We'll fix it with medication, but you'll save your life. And our single ACTIVIDAN sachet, according to all recommendations, based on all the numerous studies, should be taken with or diluted in at least 1 glass of water. As I always say, water is part of our cellular composition. If you don't use enough water, nothing will bind, and everything will settle anyway. One ACTIVIDAN alone cannot handle removing toxic substances. It all needs to be washed out, diluted. For an adult, the norm is 30 to 50 milliliters per kilogram of body weight. This does not include your teas, coffee, soups, or porridge made with water or milk. It should be clean drinking water. Pure drinking water, preferably not boiled. Because boiled water changes its crystal structure and is essentially dead water, and we need living water. Remember the fairy tales from childhood? Splash with living water, splash with dead water, and the person came back to life. Our ACTIVIDAN dissolves very well in water, and you understand that due to its soluble form, it is quickly absorbed by the cells. Children, naturally, have different doses. About 1 milliliter per 1 kilogram of body weight. But even in breastfed infants, there will never be an overdose, as I already told you. By 2 months, more than half of the glycogen in the child's liver is gone. The liver begins to acquire the characteristics of an adult, many processes are formed, the weight decreases, the volume decreases, and so on. Children after 14 years can already take the same doses as adults with serious problems. Not just 1 to 2 sachets a day. If there is indeed a very serious problem, it can be increased to 4 to 6 sachets a day. And you understand that the body restructures itself during the night. Don't hesitate to take the last dose of dissolved ACTIVIDAN at night, so the body has an energy reserve and a push for our cells. So they restructure properly, perceiving what is naturally inherent in our body. And we ask, why the Vimgrease company? Look at the comparison: 480 capsules for only $199. Many manufacturers don't specify how much L-fucose and sulfate groups are contained in the same 1 sachet. We have everything clearly listed. But how much is in a capsule? They write 50 milligrams, 12 capsules. And how much 6-deoxygalactose or sulfate fucose, limonose, is in 1 capsule is unknown. Our fucoidan is in its purest form, with no additives, but here the capsule itself is a chemical substance that can cause allergic reactions. Very often, polysaccharides are added. That is, fiber is added here, and starch may be added. If we are talking about medicinal forms, and now there are many studies, already medicinal preparations based on fucoidans are being created, especially for oncology, you understand why we need mono and oligosaccharides. You understand that the faster and the more we deliver this to the body, the quicker the restructuring of our body toward recovery happens. Therefore, you understand that this also saves your financial resources for treatment and body recovery. And the delivery. Look at how many cities and towns, how many countries have already joined the Vimgrease company, happily consuming our ACTIVIDAN, improving their health. Thanks to the unique composition, which allows our body to maintain it at a certain level and engage in self-regulation and self-recovery processes during various diseases. In fact, you understand that this is the best solution for any person to support, strengthen health, and prevent the development of various diseases. As always, on our positive note, I will once again emphasize this for those attending our conference for the first time, that just as water, just as air, just as proper nutrition with the right balance of carbohydrates is necessary, ACTIVIDAN should be on the table of every self-respecting person. This is food. And with that, I say goodbye to you until the next conference.